Hey there, welcome back to Developer Breakdown. I'm Jesse Guarascia. You've probably never seen me before, but if you've been listening to the Noclip podcast for the last year, you've probably heard me before. I've been producing, editing, guesting on, and sometimes hosting the Noclip podcast for about a year now, which, by the way, we have a podcast. And on there, earlier in the year, I was mentioning over and over again how much I couldn't stop playing this killer first-person speedrunning game from Ben Esposito and the team at Angel Matrix, Neon White. It's a game about going as fast as you can from the start of a level to the end, using the cards you collect along the way to shoot, jump, ground slam, dash, and so much more. It's an exhilarating thrill ride from start to finish, and I loved every second of it. And you know, as such a big fan of Neon White, I thought to myself, how did they make this? How do you make my favorite game of the year? And so I asked one of the people who made it.
Hi, my name's Ben Esposito, and I'm the game director for Neon White.
Now, Ben has been making games professionally for about a decade, working on some of the most well-regarded titles out there, as well as truly one-of-a-kind indies. A lot of them share a common DNA of delivering slower-paced, narrative-focused experiences, the almost exact opposite of Neon White. His last game was about making things fall into a hole. It's spectacular, but it's no speedrunning game, unless you want to play it that way. And so my first and biggest question was, how do you go from making those kinds of games to making a breakneck speed running first-person platforming game? I'll let Ben explain.
To me, it's natural, but I think it doesn't make a lot of sense from the outside. So the reason why I would say is that I spent the first half of my career, not half, I spent the first 10 years of my career working on games that kind of they were made with the idea that games need to be something greater. They need to aspire to a greater art form, and we're going to make games that are totally unique, totally novel. We're going to reinvent the wheel, and we're going to create something that's new and something that's art. And so a lot of stuff I worked on What Remains of Edith Finch, I think speaks a lot to that, and I got to explore that a lot. And with Donut County, I got to explore the idea of a game that both kids and adults could play together, and I wanted to make something that you've never seen before. And so I feel like I did a pretty good job of that. I think it was very accessible, and I'm happy with how it turned out. So after that, I was like, you know what, I'm kind of done with making games that are about how much I hate video games. So I wanted to get back in touch with my roots, which are loving video games and being completely obsessed. And so I went back to thinking about what really got me into, game development in the first place. And that was making custom maps for Counter-Strike. So this game is kind of tapping back into everything that I loved about video games. And that's why, to me, this is a love letter. It's not specifically like any game in particular, but it's meant to be. It's meant to be about how much I love video games. So the prototype started in 2017 when I was oh my God, I can't work on Donut County anymore. This is killing me. So I prototyped a first-person platformer, but it was just noodling. And then later in 2018, after Donut County shipped, I picked it up again. That's when I took it from being a card-based first-person shooter that was no fun to a first-person speedrunning game that was a lot of fun.
Wow, so this is close to what you were working on 5 years ago, idea-wise.
Yeah, yeah, right. Because I was gonna abandon this prototype because it was no fun at all. Because it was a card-based, a deck builder, first-person shooter, and so you would build a deck and then be randomly dealt weapons from your deck, and it should be really obvious, but it wasn't to me at the time, that getting randomized weapons is no fun at all, and nobody likes it, including me. So yeah, that's when, before I abandoned it, I was like, I'm gonna take one more crack at it. And so I removed all the randomness, and I introduced the idea that you could discard them for a special ability. And so I just had one that let you double jump, which is the pistol in this game. And so you could do it with guns, and we experimented with the idea of making them guns, but it actually doesn't help communicate what's important about the game, because this game's not a shooter really, it's more of a platformer. Yeah. And so those discard abilities are really what the game's all about. And so communicating them as these are resources that represent both shooting and doing an ability was ultimately way clearer to people than having like a gun that you didn't want to lose, because guns and FPSs are so valuable. So now, you know, we have these cards, you just toss them away. In fact, you shouldn't hold on to them because you'll get a bad score. And I built a map with the card resources being put exactly, you know, in specific places. And then I sent it to a friend of mine, and he sent back a list of times that he got on every level. And I was like, oh, I could beat those. That's not a problem. And then so we started trading like leaderboard times. And that's when I realized this was like, there's something here. Because this is a level-based game, we have like 130 something levels. It was really important that we got all the movement down early, because if we changed any value, like those levels would have to change as well. And that has such a like cascading effect. So we really had to make sure like the jump height, the jump distance, the gravity, like everything had to feel good to us at the time before we like committed to doing any like serious layouts.
So when you were approaching level design for this, how do you make a level that is designed to be broken? How much iteration goes into this sort of thing?
Quite a bit of iteration over many years. Like a lot of the levels are similar to the way they were years and years ago, because they took a lot of refinement. But the general magic trick of this game is pretty simple. It's that we don't believe that giving you more freedom like makes the game more interesting. So what we do is we give you an extremely excruciatingly clear path through the level. And that's actually meant, you know, to help you if you're, you know, starting out, but also it's meant to distract you from the real like gameplay of the game. The thing that we really wanted to accomplish with the first part of the game, like the first hour or so that you play, is that we don't tell you that this is a game about optimization. You play the game, you start to get a sense of like, you know, what it's asking you to do. You see there's a timer, you see, you know, there's different mechanics that you can kill stuff. But we wanted you to arrive at the feeling of like, wait, I could do that faster yourself. And so we made sure to like have as many kind of checkpoints along the way that would try to guide you back to replaying the level to go faster. But then also, if you didn't get enough gold medals, that meant you probably weren't optimizing enough. So we stop your progress and we say, you can't progress until you go back and get gold medals.
Yeah.
If you haven't played the game, gifts are essentially like once you beat a level once, you can revisit that level and there will be a gift somewhere, usually not hidden. Usually you can see it pretty easily. But to get to it, you have to use like a kind of totally different card combination in order to get over to where the gift is. And the benefit of that is that when you're starting to get into speedrunning that level, you get a better sense of what cards are even in the level because you've spent the time looking for the gift and figuring out like, okay, there's 3 Godspeeds and there's, you know, 2 Elevates. You can kind of like use it as a way to relax and not force yourself to like, get a perfect run every time. And hopefully that like level of downtime will actually like make it easier for you to speedrun the level later. And, you know, a lot of people think that's not fun. But in our game, like that's the whole reason to play. So, you know, we felt like, yeah, you might think that's a bit of friction that's unfair, but when you go back, you'll realize why you're playing this game in the first place. When we were talking about how to really like figure out the art style for this game, you know, we had these 2 elements that were really, really important to us. One was readability. You had to be able to understand a level layout without even looking at it. And then the other side was it has to be really, really efficient to make because we are a very small team and we have to make dozens and dozens and dozens of levels. And so, you know, each level would be made up of a very small amount of colors and we would keep them super, super consistent. And so, you know, in the first 3 missions of the game, you're kind of in this world where like all the walls are white and the water's blue and anything breakable is red and ivy is green and green is where you want to go. And so, you know, having those like really strict rules was a nice artistic constraint, but it also made sure that like we were never going to be able to add detail that would distract you in a fundamental way. So the idea of heaven in this game, and this is, you could call this a spoiler, but like the idea of heaven in the game is that like this place is not exactly like a holy place necessarily. It is a place of indulgence. So, we were always interested in those depictions of heaven that were like extremely gaudy and over the top and like not that classy. And we were like, okay, we want to build out like what does it mean to be in the Cheesecake Factory version of heaven. Glassport, this was a concept by our artist Jorge. He was awesome, and he kind of just produced this idea out of nowhere of like these flying boats in this port, and these awesome like huge arc shapes and stuff. And so we wanted to have that element of decadence that was like actually very earthly, juxtaposed with these like very beautiful like mirror finish cloud reflections. So you're playing this game and you're like, oh, I'm in heaven. This is really cool. And then you're like, wow, there's a yacht, and I'm gonna like walk on the yacht, and it's just like, oh, this is kind of tacky actually. And like that's meant to kind of speak to the universe of the game, and you find out more as you play it, like why things are the way they are. But we wanted to do like really broad strokes storytelling with the environments. We obviously didn't fill it with tons of detail because it was not important to fill it with detail, but also it was very distracting to fill it with detail. So we tried to strike a balance with these just thematic ideas in it.
That's actually one of the things that really impressed me about Neon White the first time I was playing it. Despite the levels all being designed to be finished in a handful of seconds, they still all have so many details that make them feel unique, and yet none of them feel out of place. In fact, that feeling of cohesion is something that carries over to every part of the game, from the level design to the UI, the story, and of course the heart-pounding music by Machine Girl. Everything feels totally unique, but also like it was always destined to be there. Ben and I actually spoke about the music and loads of other interesting topics about Neon White in our hour-long extended interview, which you can check out now if you head over to patreon.com/noclip. Alright, that's enough from me. Let's get back to Ben.
A conversation that happened among all the level designers very frequently was the question of like, should we ever ask you to do blank? So the levels were kind of a back and forth. We had a handful of level designers, Ames, Justin, Carter, and Russell. I designed a few of the levels. But what we would do is we would build out a rough layout that had the major encounters of a level. And once we were happy with the individual encounters, we started putting them together just so that there would also be a shortcut. And in doing so, as we kind of like we like rounded off corners, we like turned things, moved them closer together. We found that we kept introducing these like really small optimizations that most of the time were not necessarily like intended. But because we would be testing back and forth, and like someone would make a level, they would like do a Discord call with me, and I'd start playing it, and I'd look around and I'd be like, could you theoretically skip that part? And then we would both try it, and it was a real collaborative thing. And we really wanted to make sure that like we never asked you to do something that was so finicky just to like get through a level. So one of the examples is actually one of the first cards you get, the Purify. If you use a bomb on the ground, you will and you hit the explosion, you'll fly up from it. If you use 2 bombs at the same time, you will go way higher, and it's just way faster and more efficient, and you can do really awesome stuff with it. At first, we forced you to use a double bomb because we wanted you to learn the mechanic. And like kind of like over time, we kept revisiting it and being like, the double bomb is confusing to people. They like use one bomb and another one, and they never quite learn it. And so we decided like, yeah, in this case, the levels are never, ever going to ask you to use a double bomb. Even though we'd love for you to figure it out, and people do figure it out, we just are going to make sure that, the designers never ask you. And the game is ultimately about like having a conversation with the level designer, because the level designer has a very clear goal for you in every single level, but you're trying to undermine it. So we wanted to be very clear and upfront and never ask you to do something that confused you or felt like you didn't understand why we would even teach you to do that. The idea of putting a visual novel in a speedrunning first-person shooter is bananas. It's a bad idea, right? On paper, no one would ever approve of that. But it was the whole idea of it was like, we are going to indulge. we want to make this really character-focused, anime-inspired story. And we also want to create a game where like there's a lot of downtime for you to explore the world and not get burned out on all the speedrunning. So the fact that there is a story is really just for pacing, essentially. And, we thought we did a pretty good job of balancing like when, it's time for the story and when it's time to just, blast through the levels, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm happy with that. We wanted to make a game that was like unabashedly itself and really self-indulgent and fun. And the story is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be a good time. It's not supposed to make you feel bad. Something that we talked about early on, me and my partner Geneva, who is an animator. She's a director of cartoons, and she's really great with characters. And she helped create the cast. And we had two writers. We had Avi and Ryan. They brought the script to life. And something that we really decided on very early was like we are kind of sick of the fact that indie games have to always be a subversion of something classic. And it's like, this is part of visual novels too. Like visual novels are very, very subversive by nature. Like most of them start with very clear archetypes and then, oh no, like there's a time loop and actually this character, has been stuck for 1,000 years and they're really sad. That's like just part of the DNA of it. So what we wanted to do with this game was like actually tap into like the power of the archetypes and the relationship dynamics that were kind of like subverting it just for the sake of saying we subverted it. What we wanted to do with Red was like we wanted to make, the femme fatale, and like she's got all the like classic markers of it, but she's got a lot of details to her that I think are really funny and specific, like the fact that she loves minions and she's like scared of horror movies.
Henchmen's.
Something that we kind of have been a little bit surprised by is that like a lot of the choices in the story are because it's very character based. And so when Yellow says you're the Sasuke to my Naruto or something along that effect, that's because he's a weeb, right? He's like a jock who is also a nerd. And so it's not like we're not doing a wink to be like, have you heard of Naruto? Because like, of course you've heard of Naruto.
Yeah.
It's just meant to be like a character line. And same with Violet. She's not coming on to White because she's like horny for a self-insert character. It's because she's trying to manipulate him. We thought it would be fun to explore this idea that like we're not gonna like shock you with some twist of this character. We wanted to do like the example of that archetype. We just wanted it to be really, like I said, fun and self-indulgent. And yeah, we wanted to do those character dynamics that we really we love and we're very passionate about. Going into making this game, we knew that we were making a game that no one asked for, and we were making choices that no one thinks are a good idea. I think the funny thing about the whole game is like the combination of the extremely hardcore aesthetic, like the anime aesthetic with the story, plus the like very movement based first person platforming stuff. And to me, that stuff goes hand in hand because that's the kind of content I was consuming at like my teenage years. But at my core, the soul of me as a gamer is into the movement stuff and the extremely indulgent anime. There's obviously like a little bit of a Cowboy Bebop influence, and I mean we even have the voice actor for the main character, and he's not the same character at all, but like he's got that kind of classic voice that to me is like the anime, the gold standard anime dub voice.
For the last time, I'm not a baby.
So yeah, it's pulling like not particularly from any anime, but it's like trying to be an amalgamation of like all things that are cool. I love Grasshopper manufacturer games. Like Killer 7 is one of my favorites for being like all about dedicating itself to a total aesthetic experience, even if it means that the gameplay is kind of weird. The story is very unusual but really interesting, and really like it's all about feeling really cool. And I wanted to tap into that kind of like that aesthetic because that's what I thought was really cool about video games. So, the mission complete animation, when you get it in this game, oftentimes it comes after like a really dramatic story beat, and like someone will like die, and then White will like do a backflip and be like, not bad for a dead guy, huh? And it's like, that's part of it. That like weird like tonal clash is part of, the cool factor to me. We chose a bunch of aesthetic, approaches that put up a lot of barriers to certain people. Like if you say anime, they're just like, I don't do anime, sorry. And even with the first person shooter, people are like, oh, I don't do first person stuff, sorry. So, we wanted to remain fully true to ourselves and make something that was like indulgent and fun. And, if you actually gave it a try, it wouldn't actually be that as alienating as you thought. And, we wanted to make a game that really catered to people who weren't necessarily like into, here's the top shelf of video games, the most prestigious stuff. We wanted to celebrate the mid-budget game. We wanted to celebrate, the weird stuff that doesn't quite work. So, the game is, we say the game is for freaks because like you have to be someone who appreciates the weird and, wonderful edges of video gaming and not just, the 10 out of 10s.
That's how it's done.
Thanks so much to Ben Esposito for taking the time to talk to me all about Neon White. It's my favorite game of the year, and I'm so glad I know more about how it was made. And if you want to become a leaderboard freak like me, you can head on over to Steam or the Nintendo Switch eShop and pick it up right now. And hey, let us know if there's any games you'd like to see developers break down. That's why we call it that. Let us know in the comments below, and head on over to patreon.com/noclip to support more content like this.